The word non-essential echoed across the glass boardroom like a verdict already signed. I didn't argue. I just placed a single page on the table and watched 3 executives realize the deal they were celebrating didn't exist without my signature. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished walnut and expensive caution. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a trophy. Steel, glass, ambition. Inside, the mood was warmer. Too warm. The kind of warmth that comes when someone thinks they've already won. "Your role is non-essential," Marissa Vale, our CFO, said again, calm, clinical, as if she were reading a footnote. Her voice had the smooth precision of a spreadsheet balanced to the penny. Around the table, heads nodded. Legal. Treasury. 2 external advisors flown in for the $3.2 billion credit agreement. A celebration draft sat chilling somewhere, I was sure. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I slid the single page across the lacquered surface. No dramatic gestures, just paper moving over wood, the quiet sound of gravity shifting. For a second, no one touched it. Then Daniel from legal adjusted his glasses. He leaned forward, the way people do when they think they're about to confirm their assumptions. His eyes skimmed the header, then stopped, then went back to the top. Silence doesn't fall in rooms like this. It tightens. Marissa folded her hands. "Is there something unclear about the restructuring?" "Oh, it's very clear," I said, my tone almost conversational. "Especially the sign-off clause." A flicker, barely visible, but it was there. Daniel cleared his throat. "This version includes a condition precedent." "It always did," I replied gently. "You just didn't expect it to matter." The external advisors exchanged a look. One of them reached for the page. The other leaned closer, as if proximity might change what was printed in black and white. The clause was not dramatic. It didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It simply stated that execution of the credit agreement required the written approval of the head of strategic risk. That would be me. The air changed temperature. Marissa smiled, but it no longer reached her eyes. "This can be amended." "Not without triggering lender review," Daniel said quietly, still reading. "And the syndicate is already aligned." Aligned. A beautiful word. It means too many moving parts to reverse without breaking something expensive. I watched the realization settle across the table like a slow sunrise no one ordered. "You positioned my team as advisory," I said. "You removed us from steering committees. You called us overhead." I tilted my head slightly. But the sign-off clause survived every draft. No one answered that. Outside, traffic moved in miniature below us. Inside, careers recalculated in real time. Marissa leaned back. "You're suggesting the deal collapses without your signature?" "I'm stating a fact," I replied. "Without it, the personal guarantees clause activates." That landed. The advisors froze. Daniel's jaw tightened, because everyone in that room knew what personal guarantees meant. It meant board exposure. It meant executives tying their private wealth to corporate risk. It meant sleepless nights measured in decimal points. "You wouldn't," Marissa said softly. There it was. Not a threat. A test. I met her gaze. "I don't have to do anything." A beat. The irony was almost elegant. For months I had been excluded from key discussions. Budget trimmed, access limited, streamlining, they'd called it. And yet here we were, on the verge of the largest refinancing in company history, balanced on a clause they had forgotten to neutralize. Daniel spoke first. "If we proceed without her, the lenders can demand enhanced security." "Which includes personal guarantees from named executives," I finished. A different silence now. Heavier. Real. Marissa tapped the table lightly. Once. Twice. Thinking. "You're leveraging technicality," she said. "I'm honoring governance," I replied. That difference matters, especially in courtrooms. One of the advisors whispered something about timing. Another mentioned reputational optics. Words like exposure, material risk, fiduciary duty began drifting across the table like cautious birds. For the first time all morning, no one was celebrating. Marissa finally looked at Daniel. "Is there any workaround?" He didn't answer immediately. That pause said more than any memo. "There is," he said at last, "but it would require reopening negotiations with the lenders, which would delay funding." Delay. Another beautiful word. It translates to headlines. Marissa's eyes returned to me, calculating, measuring, trying to decide whether I was bluffing. I wasn't. I didn't need to be loud, or angry, or triumphant. I simply existed, legally required. Months ago, when they had moved to marginalize my department, I had requested one thing in writing: confirmation that all risk sign-offs remained unchanged under the credit agreement. It had seemed procedural at the time, boring, administrative. They had approved it in under 6 minutes, paper remembers. The room shifted again, but this time not against me. "What do you want?" Marissa asked. There it was, the real question. Not revenge, not power, not spectacle. I folded my hands calmly. Reinstatement of strategic risk to executive committee level, formal acknowledgement in the deal announcement, and budget restoration. The advisors stared at Marissa. This wasn't sabotage. It was alignment. Governance strengthening. Optics improved. Lender confidence reinforced. All legally sound. The irony was almost kind. Marissa inhaled slowly. For someone who had declared me non-essential 15 minutes earlier, she now had to decide whether her own assets might become collateral. She turned to Daniel. "If she signs, guarantees stay off the table?" "Yes." Another pause. I could feel the tension pulling at the edges of the room like fabric stretched too tight. Finally, Marissa nodded once. Controlled. Precise. "Prepare the amendment." Relief did not flood the room. It recalibrated. But here's the thing about power shifts. They echo. Because while the executives began discussing next steps, one of the advisors was still staring at the page, at the fine print, and he hadn't spoken yet. And if you think that was the most dangerous line in that document, you haven't read the footnotes. Some rooms change in minutes. Others explode quietly, days later. This was the kind that rewrites careers long after the meeting ends. If you'd walked out then, you would have missed what happened next. The meeting didn't end. It rearranged itself. Chairs shifted, laptops reopened. The celebratory tone that had hovered over the table dissolved into something sharper, more surgical. Marissa no longer leaned back. She leaned in. When power recalibrates, posture follows. Daniel asked for a printed copy of the full credit agreement, not the executive summary, not the track changes, the entire document. That was new. I stayed still. Calm is louder than triumph. The advisor who had been studying the page finally spoke. His name was Reed, and until that moment he had played the role of neutral observer, the kind of man who lets others underestimate him. "There's an additional cross-reference," he said slowly. Daniel's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Where?" "Appendix F covenant alignment with risk oversight certification." The air tightened again. Marissa exhaled through her nose. "That's standard language." "It is," Reed agreed. "Unless oversight was formally downgraded." He looked at me when he said it. 3 months ago, Marissa had circulated an internal memo repositioning strategic risk as advisory support. The move had been subtle, framed as efficiency. No vote, no board amendment. Just language. Language is architecture. Shift one beam, the structure trembles. Daniel flipped pages quickly now. Paper brushed paper in urgent rhythm. He found the clause, read it, then read it again. If oversight authority was materially altered, he murmured, lenders must be notified. Silence. Marissa's jaw set. It wasn't materially altered. Reed raised an eyebrow. Was it documented? No one answered immediately, because documentation is the difference between intent and fact. I watched the understanding spread, slow, unwelcome, irreversible. If they argued my role was non-essential, they risked triggering a disclosure requirement under the credit agreement. If they acknowledged my authority, they validated my leverage. Either path required precision. You're implying we misrepresented governance? Marissa asked Reed carefully. I'm implying, he said evenly, that lenders care deeply about who signs the sign-off clause. The word clause felt heavier now, like a lock clicking into place. Outside, the city continued its indifferent motion. Inside, every breath felt negotiated. Daniel closed the binder gently. If this goes to the syndicate before clarification, they could request enhanced covenants. Enhanced meaning? One advisor asked. Additional reporting, possibly board-level attestations. Which meant exposure. The conversation shifted again, quieter now, edged with urgency. Emails were drafted but not sent. Calls considered but postponed. The deal, once a celebratory headline, had become a glass sculpture balanced on procedure. Marissa turned to me, her composure intact but thinner. You planned this. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization. I documented. I corrected. There's a difference. Planning implies ambush. Documentation implies patience. She studied me for a long moment. In that gaze was calculation, frustration, and something else. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. You're asking for reinstatement, she said. Executive committee, budget restoration. Public acknowledgement. Yes. And you'll sign. If governance is properly reflected. The room understood the exchange for what it was. Not a standoff, but a reset. But resets have costs. Reed leaned back slightly. There's another angle. Everyone looked at him. If lenders interpret internal conflict around risk authority, they may revisit pricing. That landed harder than the personal guarantees had. Pricing meant interest margins. Basis points on $3.2 billion. Tiny numbers that translated into millions. Marissa's composure cracked just slightly. On what grounds? Perceived governance, instability. 2 words, devastating in their simplicity. The irony was almost poetic. In trying to sideline strategic risk to streamline optics, they had created the very instability lenders feared. I let the silence stretch, not to punish, to allow understanding. Finally, Daniel spoke. The cleanest solution is formal reinstatement effective immediately. We update the internal governance memo. We append clarification to the deal binder. No lender notification required if oversight remains intact. Marissa looked at the windows, at the skyline, at the invisible weight of $3.2 billion suspended in air. Then she nodded once. Draft it. Relief didn't flood the room this time. It reorganized loyalties, because something else had shifted, subtler but deeper. The executives who had dismissed my department were now watching me differently, not as overhead, not as advisory, but as structural, and structures don't disappear quietly. As documents began circulating for amendment, my phone buzzed softly against the table. Unknown number. I ignored it. A minute later, it buzzed again. Daniel glanced at me. Everything all right? I'm sure it is, I said, though I hadn't checked. The third vibration came with a preview notification. Board chair. Interesting. Marissa saw it too. Are you expecting a call? She asked. No. That was true. The board had been briefed on the refinancing timeline. They had not been briefed on internal role reclassifications. Reed's gaze sharpened. If the chair is calling now, someone has already flagged something. The room stilled again. Because here's the thing about governance. It doesn't live in conference rooms. It lives in oversight. Marissa's phone lit up as well. Same name. The celebration champagne downstairs would remain unopened. Daniel swallowed. Should we answer? Marissa looked at me, not as an adversary now, but as a variable she could no longer isolate. You first, she said quietly. I picked up the phone. Good morning. The chair's voice came through, calm but unmistakably alert. I've just received a question from one of the lead lenders. Every heartbeat in that room seemed to align with the ticking second hand on the wall. They're asking, the chair continued, why strategic risk appears downgraded in recent internal documentation. Marissa went very still. I kept my tone measured. There's no downgrade. Oversight remains unchanged under the credit agreement. A pause. Good, the chair said. Because if there were, we'd be discussing personal guarantees this afternoon. Across the table, Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The board already knew. And if you think that was coincidence, you haven't considered who forwarded the governance memo last week. Sometimes the quietest move isn't sliding a page across a table. Sometimes it's knowing exactly when not to send one. The call ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Marissa's expression had shifted from irritation to calculation to something almost like recalibration. We proceed as discussed, she said finally. Full reinstatement, immediate clarification. No argument, no resistance. Just correction. But power rarely shifts without leaving a trace. Because as amended drafts began circulating, one detail surfaced that no one had anticipated, buried in the lender correspondence timestamp. The initial inquiry had been logged 12 hours before this meeting began, before Marissa called me non-essential, which meant someone outside this room already knew the clause mattered, and they hadn't warned her. If you think this was only about a signature, you're missing the real game that just started. If you've ever been told you are non-essential, drop a magnifying glass in the comments. Sometimes the quietest roles hold the strongest leverage. By the time the amended governance memo circulated, the building felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just aware. Corporate headquarters have a rhythm. Keycards chiming, elevator doors sighing open, muted conversations dissolving into carpet. That morning, every sound seemed slightly amplified, as if the walls themselves were listening. My reinstatement hit inboxes at 11:42 a.m., subject line, strategic risk, executive committee alignment confirmation, concise, clinical, irreversible. Within minutes, messages began appearing on my screen, some congratulatory, some cautious, some reading like they had been drafted, deleted, and rewritten 3 times before pressing send. One stood out, from Treasury Operations. Does this affect reporting structure effective immediately? Not why, not how, just effective immediately? Yes, it did. Because authority isn't theoretical. It redraws org charts. I stood by the window of my office, looking down at the city below, sunlight caught on glass towers, turning them into mirrors. For months I had worked in partial shadow, excluded from early briefings, copied late, consulted last. Now calendars were reshuffling. The door knocked softly. Daniel stepped in without waiting for a full invitation, a thick binder tucked under his arm. "We need to talk," he said. His tone wasn't adversarial. It was measured, strategic. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he placed the binder down and opened it to a flagged section. "Lender correspondence," he said. "The timestamp you noticed?" 12 hours before the board call, before the meeting, before the word non-essential had echoed across polished walnut. "They flagged the sign-off clause proactively," Daniel continued, "asked for confirmation of oversight continuity." "Which means," I said quietly, "they sensed a shift." He nodded. "The interesting thing about lenders is this. They don't panic. They detect. Their risk teams read tone changes in documentation the way meteorologists read barometric pressure. Marissa's internal memo, downgrading strategic risk to advisory, had been uploaded into the deal data room as part of governance disclosures. Small detail, massive consequence. They compared versions, Daniel said. They saw the language change and decided to test the structure, I finished. He looked at me more directly now. You didn't alert them. It wasn't a question. No. Why? Because leverage evaporates when announced too early. Because governance should correct itself before external pressure forces it. Because I believe the board deserved clarity without spectacle. But I didn't say all that. I prefer alignment to escalation, I replied. Daniel studied me for a long moment, then finally sat. There's another development, he said. My pulse didn't change, but the air did. The board has scheduled a special session this afternoon for governance review. The words landed with quiet force. Marissa had intended to streamline authority. Instead, she had triggered scrutiny at the highest level. The building's internal chat system pinged softly on my screen. A message from Reed. Interesting morning. Coffee later. Neutral tone. Not neutral intent. Reed hadn't missed the power shift. Neither had anyone else in that room. Daniel closed the binder slowly. There's pressure building, he said. Not against you. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I leaned back, feeling something unfamiliar. Not triumph. Not vindication. Stability. Months of strategic patience were crystallizing into formal recognition. And yet, something about the timing unsettled me. Because lenders don't escalate without cause, and boards don't convene emergency reviews unless someone pushes. Who uploaded the revised memo? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Finance operations. Under whose instruction? He didn't answer immediately. That's being clarified. Clarified. Another beautiful corporate word. It means someone is about to become accountable. Outside my office, I could sense movement. Assistants walking faster than usual, doors closing with more intention. News travels in corporations like scent in air, invisible, inescapable. My phone buzzed again. Reed this time. Careful, the message read. You're not the only one documenting. A chill traced down my spine, not fear, but awareness. Documentation protects. It also exposes. The special board session invitation appeared in my calendar at 12:03 p.m. Attendees, board chair, independent directors, CFO, general counsel, head of strategic risk, me, no advisors, no observers. That mattered. Daniel stood. Be prepared, he said quietly. They're not just reviewing governance. What are they reviewing? He paused at the door. Intent. The word lingered long after he left. Intent is harder to prove than documentation. It lives between emails, in tone shifts, in strategic omissions. I turned back to my screen and opened the original governance memo Marissa had circulated months ago. Streamlined reporting, reduced redundancies, advisory alignment, language designed to sound efficient, not diminishing. But perception is its own metric. My inbox chimed again, this time from an unknown internal alias. No signature, no greeting, just one line. Check page 47 of the original board deck. My breath slowed. Page 47. I pulled the archived board presentation from the refinancing kickoff, scrolled carefully past financial projections, past capital allocation charts. There it was. Slide 47, a flowchart of governance oversight, clearly labeling strategic risk as a required executive-level function under the credit agreement. Not advisory, required. The timestamp on the anonymous message showed it had been sent minutes after my reinstatement memo circulated. Someone inside the building was watching closely, not just the deal, the narrative. And narratives, once exposed, can't be controlled. I leaned back, letting the implications settle. If the board compared slide 47 to the downgraded internal memo, the question wouldn't be about a clause. It would be about consistency, about transparency, about whether someone had attempted to reframe authority without disclosure. My phone vibrated once more, this time Marissa. "Can you come to my office before the board session?" Her tone was composed, professional, but there was something underneath it. Not panic, calculation. The skyline outside my window had shifted from bright noon to the subtle gray of gathering clouds. Light diffused across glass towers, softening edges, storm weather. I closed the board deck slowly, because in corporate battles the most dangerous moment isn't confrontation. It's when everyone realizes the documentation tells a story they can't rewrite, and someone just turned to page 47. Marissa's office sat one floor above mine, framed in glass and restraint. The door was half open when I arrived, which was unusual. She preferred control, closed doors, controlled narratives, curated optics. Today, the door signaled something else. "Come in," she said, without looking up. Her desk was immaculate, as always. 2 monitors, 1 leather-bound notebook, a silver pen placed exactly parallel to its edge. Precision was her armor, but the screens betrayed tension. One displayed the lender portal, the other, slide 47. She didn't offer me a seat immediately. "You received a message," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "From whom?" "Anonymous." She finally looked at me. "And you checked page 47. "I did." A silence settled between us, not hostile, but sharpened. "That slide," she began carefully, "was part of an early governance model." "It was presented to the board," I replied, "and later optimized." "Optimized?" The word almost made me smile. "It labeled strategic risk as required executive oversight under the credit agreement," I said evenly, "not advisory." Her jaw tightened slightly. The functional oversight didn't change. The documentation did. There it was again. Documentation versus intent. She walked around her desk now, slower than usual. Not pacing, measuring. "You're aware," she said, "that perception of internal fragmentation could damage lender confidence." "I'm aware. And that this board session isn't just about governance alignment." "I'm also aware of that." A flicker of something passed across her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or reassessment. "You're not escalating," she said. "No. You could. I won't." That answer shifted something, because escalation would have forced confrontation, forced optics, forced positions into corners. I had no interest in corners. Marissa stopped by the window. The clouds outside had thickened, dimming the skyline to steel and shadow. "Do you know why I repositioned your department?" she asked quietly. It was the first honest question she'd asked all day. "Because you believed centralizing authority would streamline negotiations," I said. "Yes." "And because you didn't trust independent oversight slowing execution." She didn't deny it. "In a $3.2 billion refinancing," she said, "speed matters. So does resilience." She turned to face me fully now. "And now? Now the board will ask whether governance adjustments were communicated transparently. And your answer?" "My answer will be factual." The tension shifted again, less adversarial, more strategic. Marissa walked back to her desk and closed the lender portal window. "They won't remove me," she said calmly. "It wasn't arrogance, it was assessment." "I'm not seeking removal," I replied. "I know." That acknowledgement hung in the room. What she had miscalculated wasn't my ambition. It was the durability of structure. The intercom on her desk buzzed softly. "Board members have begun logging in," her assistant said. "Thank you." Marissa muted the line and looked at me one last time before we left her office. If the board asks whether governance was compromised, she said, what will you say? I considered the question carefully. Governance was tested, I answered, and reinforced. She studied me, then gave a slight nod. Fair. The board session was virtual, but no less intense. The large conference room downstairs had been reserved. Mahogany table, multiple screens lining the walls, the city dim beyond tinted glass. When we entered, Daniel was already seated, laptop open, expression unreadable. On the screens, directors appeared one by one. The chair's face filled the central display. Let's begin, she said. No pleasantries. The first 10 minutes moved clinically. Timeline review, clause clarification, lender inquiry summary. Calm voices, structured language. Then slide 47 appeared. The room tightened. The chair leaned forward slightly. This slide, she said, clearly positions strategic risk as executive-level oversight required under the credit agreement, yet subsequent internal communication reframed that role as advisory. No accusation, just observation. Marissa spoke first. The functional authority remained intact. The language was intended to reflect operational efficiency, not diminished responsibility. And was the board notified of the reframing? The chair asked. A pause. No, Marissa said. Every executive understands the weight of that single word. The chair turned to me. Did strategic risks authority change in practice? No, I said. The sign-off clause remained binding. Oversight mechanisms were preserved. And were you consulted prior to the internal memo? No. Silence followed. Not chaotic, but evaluative. Independent Director Alvarez spoke next. Lenders detected the discrepancy before we did. That statement landed heavier than any accusation, because it reframed the issue, not internal conflict, but external perception. Daniel interjected carefully. The discrepancy has now been corrected. Formal reinstatement has been documented and appended to the deal binder. The chair nodded slowly. And what safeguards are in place to prevent future unilateral governance reframing? That question wasn't directed at me. Marissa answered evenly. Any structural oversight changes will require board-level acknowledgement going forward. A concession, clean, controlled. The chair studied both of us. This refinancing proceeds, she said finally. However, clarity of governance is non-negotiable. The market is unforgiving of ambiguity. The screens flickered slightly as directors shifted in their seats. Then came the unexpected question. Who initiated the upload of the revised advisory memo into the lender data room? Daniel looked down at his keyboard. Finance operations uploaded it under standard disclosure protocol. Under whose instruction? The chair pressed. Another pause. This one longer. Because now we weren't discussing language. We were discussing decision-making, and accountability has gravity. Marissa didn't look at me this time. It was authorized within finance, she said. Not a name. Not yet. The chair's expression remained composed. Will require a formal internal review. There it was, not punishment. Process. The session concluded 20 minutes later, structured, measured, but unmistakably altered. When the screens went dark, the room felt heavier, not because the deal was at risk, but because the architecture of authority had been reset publicly. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. That could have gone worse, he murmured. Yes, I agreed. But as we stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This one shorter than the last. Finance ops didn't act alone. I stopped walking. Marissa noticed. What is it? She asked. I locked my screen. Documentation, I said. Her eyes sharpened. Because if finance hadn't acted alone, then someone else had tested the structure intentionally. And this wasn't about streamlining anymore. It was about positioning. The clouds outside finally broke into rain, streaking the glass in restless lines. Deals are signed on paper. Power shifts are signed in silence. And somewhere inside this building, someone just realized their name might be in a version history they forgot to delete. Rain softened the edges of the skyline, turning glass towers into blurred silhouettes. Inside the building, however, nothing was blurred anymore. Every movement felt traced. Every email potentially forwarded. I didn't return to my office immediately. Instead, I stopped by finance operations. The department lived in a quieter wing, rows of dual monitors, spreadsheets layered like architectural blueprints, low conversations stitched together by the hum of climate control. People here were precise, methodical, not reckless. Which is why the anonymous message bothered me. Finance ops didn't act alone. That sentence didn't accuse. It suggested architecture. A junior analyst named Priya looked up as I approached. Her expression shifted. Respect, curiosity, caution. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. She nodded quickly and led me into a small glass meeting room. The walls were transparent, but the door closed softly enough to create privacy without secrecy. "You uploaded the advisory memo to the lender data room?" I asked gently. Her posture straightened. "Yes, it was part of the governance disclosure batch." "Who instructed you?" She hesitated. "CFO's office." "Specifically?" Her eyes flickered, not evasive, but calculating the safest truth. "It came through the executive coordination channel." That wasn't a name. It was a mechanism. "Was the general counsel copied?" "No." That mattered. Because governance disclosures typically flowed through legal for consistency. If this one bypassed that layer, it wasn't routine. It was expedited. "Thank you," I said calmly. "One more question. Did anyone request confirmation that the language aligned with the credit agreement?" Her brow furrowed. "No, it was labeled informational." Informational. The most dangerous word in compliance. I left finance ops with more clarity than I'd had 10 minutes earlier. Not outrage, clarity. The upload hadn't been accidental. It had been procedural, just not fully vetted. Back in my office, I opened the data room audit log. Access timestamps lined the screen in neat columns. There it was. The advisory memo uploaded at 9:12 p.m. 3 weeks ago, viewed by lenders at 7:03 a.m. yesterday, and one internal access 5 minutes before the upload. Executive coordination, user ID masked under administrative privileges. Interesting. Administrative masking isn't suspicious by itself. It's common for shared executive accounts. But in moments like this, even common practices acquire sharp edges. My phone buzzed again. Read. Version history leaves fingerprints. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Already looking. A minute later, he replied, "Good. Because someone thought the clause wouldn't survive scrutiny." That phrasing stayed with me. Thought. Which meant assumption. Which meant miscalculation. There's a particular tension that forms when strategy collapses quietly. It doesn't explode. It recedes like water pulling back before revealing what's been standing beneath it all along. I forwarded the audit log to Daniel with one line. "Can legal confirm the upload authorization chain?" He responded almost instantly. "On it." Outside, the rain intensified, streaking faster against the glass. The building lights flickered faintly as clouds thickened. Storm weather tends to reveal which systems are grounded properly. An hour later, Daniel appeared at my door without knocking. "They used the executive coordination account," he said, "but the request originated from Marissa's chief of staff." That detail shifted the geometry. Chiefs of staff operate as extensions of authority. They anticipate, execute, streamline. They don't usually reinterpret structural clauses. "Intent?" I asked. "Unclear," Daniel replied. But there's no evidence of legal review prior to upload, which meant the governance language had been reframed and disclosed externally without full cross-functional confirmation. Not illegal, not reckless, but vulnerable. I leaned back in my chair. So the narrative becomes what? I asked. That finance operationalized language without anticipating lender interpretation, Daniel said. And that strategic risk oversight remains intact. He paused. Unless someone argues the reframing was deliberate. There it was again. Intent. Rain rolled down the windows in steady sheets now, distorting the city into abstract shapes. It felt appropriate, because this wasn't about a clause anymore. It was about who understood its weight and who underestimated it. My inbox chimed softly. A calendar invite. From board chair. Subject, follow-up discussion, governance process enhancements. Just me, no CFO, no legal. I exhaled slowly. Reed's earlier warning echoed in my mind. You're not the only one documenting. Documentation isn't just defense, it's positioning. I opened the invite details. Objective. Assess structural safeguards to prevent future oversight ambiguity. Safeguards. That word felt solid. This wasn't a disciplinary meeting. It was architectural. My phone vibrated once more. Unknown internal number. I let it ring twice before answering. A quiet voice on the other end. You should know, it said, the upload wasn't meant to diminish your authority. Then what was it meant to do? I asked calmly. A pause. To test lender flexibility before final pricing. The line went silent, then disconnected. I sat very still. Test lender flexibility, which meant someone believed adjusting governance optics might strengthen negotiation leverage. Risky, clever, dangerous. Because lenders don't reward ambiguity. They price it. And if governance ambiguity had been interpreted as instability, it could have cost millions in basis points. I forwarded the anonymous call summary to Daniel. His reply came back in less than a minute. That changes things. Yes, it did. Because now the board's governance review wasn't just about transparency. It was about strategy executed without full structural alignment. And strategies that bypass oversight rarely age well. The rain began to ease, leaving streaks across the skyline like unfinished sentences. By evening, word had circulated quietly that finance would undergo a process refinement assessment. No headlines, no public fallout, just internal recalibration. Marissa hadn't contacted me again that afternoon, which told me she was thinking, calculating outcomes, evaluating loyalty chains. As the office lights dimmed one by one, I remained at my desk, reviewing the amended credit agreement one last time. The sign-off clause sat unchanged, solid, unambiguous. It had never been about blocking the deal. It had been about ensuring the structure held under pressure. And tonight, the structure felt stronger, but not everyone inside it did. Because if the upload had been a strategic test, then someone believed governance was negotiable, and boards don't respond kindly to experiments conducted in shadow. My screen lit up one final time before I shut down for the evening. From board chair, short message. Thank you for holding the line. 3 words, measured, meaningful, and quietly decisive. The rain stopped completely. But storms don't end when the clouds clear. They end when everyone understands which foundations didn't move. Tomorrow, someone would realize that version histories don't just show edits, they show authors. The next morning, the sky was painfully clear. Sunlight flooded the glass facade of the building as if nothing had happened. Employees streamed through the lobby with coffee cups and earbuds, unaware that the architecture above them had shifted overnight. But inside the executive floor, gravity felt different. I arrived early. There's a particular stillness in corporate offices before 8 a.m., screens dark, chairs perfectly aligned, silence unmarred by strategy. It's the only time a building tells the truth. At 8:17 a.m., Daniel forwarded the preliminary internal review memo. Subject: governance disclosure process, findings, concise, clinical, unemotional. I read it slowly. The upload of the advisory memo had indeed originated through the CFO's executive coordination channel. The stated objective: streamlined governance optics in lender documentation to reflect centralized financial leadership. Streamlined, optics, centralized. 3 words that together sounded efficient, until paired with a sign-off clause. The memo did not accuse. It did not dramatize. It simply documented. No legal pre-clearance, no board notification, no cross-reference verification with the credit agreement language. In other words, incomplete alignment. At 8:32 a.m., another message arrived. From Marissa. Can we speak? Her tone was neutral, not defensive, not cold. Neutral can be powerful. We met in the same boardroom where this had begun. Morning light poured across the walnut table, illuminating faint fingerprints no one had noticed yesterday. Evidence of presence, of pressure. Marissa stood by the window when I entered. I miscalculated, she said without preamble. That alone shifted the atmosphere. In what way? I asked. I believed lenders would interpret centralized oversight as efficiency. Instead, they interpreted it as instability. She turned toward Alfami, and I underestimated how closely they read structural language. The admission wasn't dramatic. It was strategic. And you underestimated the durability of the sign-off clause? I said quietly. A faint smile touched her lips. Yes. Silence settled, not hostile, reflective. The board will formalize new disclosure protocols, she continued. All governance-related communications to lenders will require cross-functional verification. That's appropriate. And strategic risk will remain executive level. Agreed. The conversation felt less like reconciliation and more like recalibration, because neither of us had lost, but the structure had clarified who anchored it. She walked back to the table and placed a single document in front of me. Revised refinancing announcement draft, she said. You're quoted. I scanned it briefly. In the company's strengthened governance framework, led by strategic risk and alignment with finance and legal, subtle, accurate, public. You didn't have to include that, I said. Yes, she replied. I did. Outside the glass walls, assistants moved briskly. Emails flew. The deal was back on track, pricing stabilized, lenders satisfied, documentation reinforced. The market would never know how close governance had come to distortion, but inside these walls, everyone understood. At 9:15 a.m., the board chair called. Final review complete, she said. We're proceeding. A pause. Finance will implement process enhancements. No further action required. Measured justice. No removals. No public reprimands. Just structural correction. After the call ended, I remained seated for a moment, absorbing the stillness. Victory in corporate settings rarely looks dramatic. It looks procedural. Policies updated, language clarified, authority formalized, and reputations adjusted quietly. Later that afternoon, Reed stopped by my office. You didn't escalate, he observed. No. You could have. Yes. He leaned casually against the doorframe. Why didn't you? Because destruction is loud. Stability is powerful. Because markets reward coherence, not spectacle. Because the deal mattered, I said simply. He nodded slowly. Most people in your position would have forced a public reckoning. Public reckoning would have increased lender scrutiny, I replied. And pricing. He smiled faintly. Non-essential, he murmured. I almost laughed. By week's end, the $3.2 billion credit agreement was executed. No personal guarantees, no pricing penalties, no headlines about internal instability, just a clean close. But something intangible had shifted permanently. Executive committee invitations arrived for me automatically now. Budget approvals moved without friction. Strategic risk was no longer an afterthought in negotiations. It was a structural pillar. And Marissa, she adjusted. We became aligned in a way that hadn't existed before, not because of friendship, but because of clarity. She understood now that governance wasn't resistance. It was resilience. On Friday evening, as the office lights dimmed and the city transitioned into weekend glow, I walked past the boardroom one last time. The table was empty. The chairs perfectly arranged. Sunset light cast long shadows across polished wood. I paused at the doorway. That single page I had slid across the table days ago, it had never been about leverage. It had been about memory. Contracts remember, clauses endure. And when someone calls you non-essential in a room built on signatures, you don't argue. You document. Then you let the structure speak. By the time the final wire transfer cleared and the champagne finally opened downstairs, one thing was unmistakable. No one in that building would ever confuse visibility with value again. And the next time someone scans a credit agreement looking for speed over stability, they'll pause at the sign-off clause, because now they know exactly who it belongs to.